SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar, I'm Devdip Purkayastha from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Welcome to this module, but before I get into the module itself, just to remind you, we have talked about a very structured approach, a structured overall framework for discipline innovation to convert a new research, new technologies into new products and new businesses. The conversion from research and technology into new products and impactful, deployable solutions. So this itself is a journey, and the journey starts with identifying a problem which is relevant, which is urgent, which citizens, consumers, customers are suffering from, which if you solve that problem, customers, consumers, citizens are willing to pay for it, or the government or another company customer. So the first step of a meaningful research project, technology project, and if you are in a company as a brand manager, R&D manager, or a product manager, or if you have an MSME business, the first step is to identify what's the problem, which many people have, and which people will pay to get solved, get solutions. And these are not necessarily, as I've said before, high-tech problems like quantums, missiles, drones, robots, AI analytics, AI agents. But it also could be problems which are relevant for farmers around soil and irrigation and water, or relevant for the country itself, green energy, sustainable living. Or it could be relevant for a new kind of art form, or to take existing art form of crores and millions of artisans or village self-help groups and take their artisan business to the next level to understand what are the problems. So be it very high-tech or be it for large bodies of people, of consumers, of customers with affordable tech, the key question is, how do I discover a relevant, meaningful problem? So that is the module today. And the modules afterwards will be followed by product development and other modules of winning in the market and so on. So this is today's module. And this is part of the discipline innovation framework which I've talked in the last module. And I've tried to explain what is discipline innovation and why is it important. And again, to remind you, you can look at the screen and look at the discipline innovation key elements, of which we are starting with the first key element of problem discovery. In this lesson, I will talk about first two different sources of innovations in startup. One which is problem pull and one which is technology push. I will then deep dive into a problem pull innovation and problem pull startup methodology. We'll then talk a little bit about the benefits and risk of using a structured framework or not using a structured framework for problem discovery. I'll then go on and talk a little bit about how to adopt a formal problem discovery method. And then what are some of the skills that you need to discover a scalable, urgent, relevant problem in a structured way. Let's start with a discussion on problem pull versus technology push. What does that mean? Essentially, it is two types of origin of innovation or a startup. A problem pull innovation or a problem pull startup essentially starts with a problem in the real world. And you identify a problem in a structured way and then work backwards from the problem to develop a product or a solution or a research itself. Versus that, technology push is when you spent a lot of time to research a certain emerging technology. You have got it ready up to a point, and you now want to push it out to the market in a way that can be used by consumers, customers, or the country. What are some of the other differences between problem pull and technology push? First, what is the solution to problem and solution to market fit? In a problem pull methodology, since you're starting with a problem, the fit between the problem, the solution, the market is inherently very high. But if you look at technology push, initially the focus is on technology and the fit with a potential solution or the market can be very low. But then as you progress with taking the technology to the market and create workable solutions, the fit starts happening. If you look at the next factor of risk, the risk in a problem pull research or innovation or startup, the risk is less on the market side and more on the technology side. Because oftentimes you've identified a market need or a country need or a category need, but you may not be able to develop the solution to fulfill that need in a cost-effective way. Unlike that, in a technology push, the risk is low on the technology side, but higher on the market side. If you look at product development, usable product development, in the problem pull, it is driven by the needs of the country or your consumer of the category. It's market driven. But obviously in the technology push, it's technology driven. Same as marketing strategy. One is driven by the market and one is driven by the technology. In terms of funding also, there's a difference in profile. Typically, in a market pull, the funding is required in a phased manner as you hit more and more milestones of product development, marketing, etc. The approach to product development in problem pull, of course, is working backwards from the identified needs and the problems. And in technology push is to take the technology and make it more usable. In terms of marketing strategy, it is about solving problems, and the focus is on the problem-solving side. In technology push, the focus is on the technology features. In funding, typically problem pull innovation, research, and startup need milestone-based, activity-based funding. For example, when you develop a prototype, when you do a customer testing, when you launch your new product, when you scale up your product. But in technology push, deep tech, a lot of the funding is required upfront. In terms of some examples, if you look at problem pool, typically they come from consumer industry, the services industry, and aggregators, e-commerce, etc. But if you look at the technology push, typically it will come from defense, space, genetics, molecule development. For example, the COVID vaccine, where a lot of research had already gone into the mRNA vaccine, and that required funding upfront. So these are the two different pathways to research or startups or innovation. So if you have to deep dive into the problem pool methodology, how to discover the problems? Where are the problems? So let me give you some examples. In India, there's a lot of activity from the government side around startups. So you can visit the Startup India site and you'll find that there is a lot of problems in the forms of hackathons which the government is putting out. And if you just look at the numbers on the screen, you will see there are a couple of thousand and more problems which have already been announced, and a lot of teams have worked on them. And these problems are actually generated in the real world from ministries, from organizations, and open calls to the public. So you and I can actually submit a problem statement which is relevant for the country, which is scalable, which is urgent. And that is a great source of finding problems. What are some of the other sources of finding problems that you can work on? Different organizations in India and globally actually pose challenges in different forms, like hackathon. Next source of problem statement are on national missions. All countries have them. Japan has them, Korea has them, Germany has them, US has them, and so on. And if you look at the screen, you will see some of the national missions that are put out in the public domain by the government of India. Large organizations around the world also share problem statements and challenges in the form of hackathons. So this is an example of a fintech hackathon with fintech challenges and problem statements by the Central Bank of India. This is another example of a large bank putting out a problem statement, challenges in the public domain in the form of a hackathon in India. Globally, a very, very needed, relevant, urgent, scalable source of problem statement are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Many of you are aware of it. Some of you are working on it. For those of you who are not aware of it and not working on it, the United Nations has already published 17 SDGs which were required for the good of the planet, for the good of people, and for the good of shared prosperity. And if you look at those 17 SDGs, there are thousands of problems. And you can reflect and pick a problem that you would like to solve. There are also global challenges from global communities. For example, Enactors is a student community working on global challenges and global problems. And you can go to the Enactors website and look at some of the problems that they are trying to solve. The other completely different way of identifying problems that you'd like to solve is in the area of self-realization. In your own life, in your own experience, there'll be a lot of problems that you're experiencing. And you may want to pick up one or two of your personal problems which you think millions of people have or billions of people have, and you'd like to solve the problem. And a lot of great innovations and startups happen through self-realization. For example, Uber, the founder, experienced some problems around finding a taxi, a ride hire. And born out of that personal problem came out a startup called Uber, which came to India and then also spawned a competitive startup called Ola. Same, the Airbnb, the founders faced a problem around places to stay in. And they founded a startup called Airbnb, which then also came to India and spawned a competition called Oyo. In IIT, we have had a student who was physically challenged and went to build a great startup on prosthetics. And this is an IIT Bombay map. This is like a mini city. And I've actually worked with many of my students on typical problems that a city faces, because the IIT campus, with about 25,000 people, spread about 250 to 300 acres, has almost all the problems that a city may have. And there are smart cities around the world, and we wanted to use our IIT Bombay campus as a smart campus, and we did a lot of problem solving around water, transportation, security, etc. So these are simple ways where you choose a problem which is relevant for a large number of people, which is urgent, which is scalable, and which is what you would like to solve. So at a high level, what does a problem statement look like? And you can see a couple of examples on the screen. One is the problem of groundwater contaminated with arsenic in the state of Bengal in India, which leads to a lot of health problems. And that may be a problem that you want to work on. You can also see on the screen a problem statement around AI-based personalized testing for higher education institutes. AI has now taken on very, very sophisticated norms. And versus a standardized test, you may want to work on a targeted testing which brings out the best in a person, and therefore have a more sophisticated way of testing individual, because every individual has got slightly different skills and attitudes. Couple of other examples. One At the bottom, you can see is around how can you make our main battle tanks better through a better armor. And this is a typical defense problem. And if you look at a problem around clean air and also getting rid of stubbles, which is left over after the crop is harvested, you can work on these problems, because today what's happening is once the crop is harvested in states like Punjab and Haryana and India, the leftover stubble is burnt. And the burning creates a lot of air pollution, which then impacts cities like Delhi. So these are very high-level problems spanning different domains, spheres, etc. Once you've got a high-level problem, you then need a more detailed assessment and a framework to define the problem in much more detail. Let's reflect a bit on why do we need a structured approach to defining the problem, refining the problem, assessing the problem. And from now on, all the lessons will be pointers based, where I will try and share with you a couple of thought pointers, and I'd encourage you to reflect and discover on your own. So let's start with a few case studies, and I have purposely chosen large, globally known brands and companies so that you find it easy to research them. So we are now reflecting on why do we need a structured approach to problem discovery. Let's start with Nokia. Some of you will probably remember Nokia as one of the largest selling, most famous smartphone brands in the world till about early 2000s. But Nokia very quickly lost a lot of market share and almost got out of the phone business. Why? We know the answer, that Apple came in with a smartphone, with the touch screen and the ecosystem. Therefore, Nokia probably as a company did not understand the problems from the point of view of a customer and what a smartphone with the screen can help the customer do, what an ecosystem like the one that Apple developed can help the customer do. And therefore, Nokia was probably focused on the wrong problem in terms of just bettering their phones with the keyboards. I would also like you to discover and reflect on a company called Kodak. Kodak was a global leader in film photography. You always used a Kodak film. But as the market moved on from physical photography to digital photography, which means digital cameras, the problem assessment process that Kodak was probably using as a corporation probably did not define the problem from the perspective of a customer and technology enhancement. Again, something for you to research from the web and reflect. Let me give you a few more examples, which you can also spend some time discovering and reflecting. So some of you may have read about a video rental business called Blockbuster. And even in India, we used to have a lot of businesses, companies, small shops, which rent out a video tape to you, so you could bring it home, watch videos, and return the tape. And Blockbuster was a very famous, profitable, and valuable company. So that solved the problem of entertainment in the era of tapes. But then technology changed, and companies like Netflix and other streaming companies came on board. And suddenly the problem had changed from renting out videos to streaming videos or reels or content which the consumer wanted, and wanted it in a very targeted way. And therefore, a company like Blockbuster declined. Same with a retail chain, a US retail chain called Sears, which is a top retail chain, very popular. But slowly, as the consumer preferences moved from offline to online retail, Sears was probably working on the wrong problem. Even in India, as Flipkart, Amazon, Mantra, Tata, and a lot of these e-commerce sites have come, many of the physical brick and mortar retail stores have struggled to survive. So again, for you, something to ponder on in terms of, are the companies working on the right problems? Let me give you a couple of more examples. Some of you may remember a search engine and a content aggregator like Yahoo. And Yahoo was actually dominant in the 90s. And then certain new platforms emerged, like Google, the search engine, Facebook, the social media platform. And Yahoo actually had an opportunity to buy some of this platform. But maybe they're working on a problem which was more related to their continuing business versus the problem in the market or the problem that the consumer was facing, which means they wanted a different kind of service, which Facebook or Google and others could provide. BlackBerry is another example of a great product which is used for emailing, because it was like a phone with a keyboard and you could do a lot of emailing with it. It was very secure and a lot of company executives used it. But as the consumer taste started moving to touchscreen phones pioneered by Apple, BlackBerry started declining. And again, they're probably working on the wrong problem and did not understand the problems in the marketplace as consumer and the country and the category evolved. Final two examples. I talked about Google and Microsoft, which today are extremely successful companies, very highly market capped. But even they have had their shares of products which did not do as well, because maybe they're working on the problems that are not exactly defined to what the market or the customer or the category required. And a great example was the Google Glass, which is a smart glass, but it led to privacy concerns, etc., and did not really take off. Similarly, Microsoft has a product called Zoom, which did not quite take off in the face of other products which went on to dominate the market from Apple, etc. The reason I'm sharing a lot of these studies so that you can go out and research and reflect is that you appreciate the need for defining the problem in a very structured way. And the last two examples is, again, from market leader, very famous company called Sony. And this relates to when in the 90s, 80s and 90s, when videotapes were popular. Today we have got OTT platforms, but in the early days, videotapes. And there was a struggle for industry domination. So Sony had a format called Betamax, and there was another format called VHS. But VHS could record for longer periods of time. And Sony, even with all the research capabilities and the market presence, probably did not identify the right problem which the consumers were facing, because they wanted longer listening time. And what happened was VHS became the industry standard, and Sony and all the companies had to adopt a standard, though Sony's own Betamax standard actually did not take off. On the flip side, and much more recently, a startup called Quebec had to shut down, even though had a lot of funding, etc. And they're working on actually quite a relevant problem, which is around shorter entertainment format. Because in the earlier days, till few years back, we are all used to serials, which are about 45 minutes to 1 hour, or movies, which are 1 hour to 2.5 hours. And the problem was around consumers wanted shorter entertainment formats, like what you have today called TikTok, Instagram Reels, etc. So that identified the problem that consumers wanted shorter entertainment capsules versus 1 hour and 2 hour. But they had probably not figured out the power of a TikTok video or a reel, which is really small in terms of just the length of the entertainment. So these are pointers that I'm sharing with you. I encourage all of you to actually do your own research on each of these pointers. And as you find out more, reflect on why these highly successful companies or startups with huge amount of funding actually struggled, because they're probably not defined the problem that they're trying to work on in a structured way. So with that background, let's look at a structured problem discovery framework, which I call the 8C problem discovery framework. Because there are 8 components, 4 of them internal and 4 of them external, in terms of just defining and validating the problem. But let's start with the external assessment of the problem. Remember, there are 8 C's and 4 C's are on the external side. The first is the category. I will deep dive into all of these aspects, but at a high level, category evolution essentially means when the whole category of entertainment is moving, let's say, from taped content into streaming content. So the whole category has moved. That's a high-level example. We'll get into more detailed assessment later on. The second C is around the country. A lot of times, the country declares a mission. And the country as a whole, for example, India as a whole, may move from physical payments and cards to electronic payments, peer-to-peer, like UPI. So the whole country has moved. You can look at customers and their habits and usage. For example, when the customers move from shopping in physical stores to shopping online. And then the fourth C to look at externally is competition. For example, if there is a Google search and then there is a ChatGPT which comes up, and then Google comes up with its own version of generative AI, and then there is someone else from France called Claude which comes up as another version of Gen AI. There's a lot of competitive activities. So you need to look at that when you're defining a problem. Internally, there are also 4 C's of assessment. The first one is around capability. You may identify a problem, but you may not have the capability to solve that problem. For example, putting a man on Mars. It's a known problem. It's a desirable problem to solve, but the capability may not exist. The second is collaboration. A lot of problems cannot be solved just by one institute or one area of research or a startup. And you need to collaborate. Then you look at convergence. And we'll have a lot of examples for each of those C's. For example, earlier, telecom was separate, and the people who put up the network and gave the telecom services may not be in the content business. But increasingly, companies like Jio are providing the telecom service as well as the content. And then the last thing is around cognition. We'll deep dive into it, but it is around understanding the softer aspects of the problem. Let's deep dive into each of those C's, the 8 C's as I call them, one by one.